I had been saving baby names long before I ever became pregnant. Not because I was obsessed with having children. Not because I had planned every detail of my future. I simply loved names. I loved the way a name could carry a story. A grandmother's memory. A family tradition. A place you'd never forgotten. Or sometimes, just a beautiful sound that made you smile. For years, I kept a private list on my phone. Nobody knew about it. Not my husband, Daniel. Not my mother. Not even my best friend. It was something that belonged entirely to me. A little collection of possibilities for a future I wasn't sure would ever come. There were maybe 20 names on that list. But 2 of them were special. Evelyn Grace. And Miles James. Evelyn was my grandmother's name. Grace was my mother's middle name. Miles was my grandfather's favorite author's first name. James was my father's middle name. They weren't random names. They were pieces of my family. Pieces I wanted to carry forward someday. And, apparently, I wasn't the only person who had been paying attention. I first noticed something strange at Sunday dinner. My husband's parents had invited everyone over. Daniel and I arrived around 6. His older brother, Jason, was already there with his wife, Rachel. Rachel was sitting at the kitchen island, scrolling through her phone. She looked up when I walked in. Finally, I laughed. Traffic. She smiled. Then she looked at my stomach. I wasn't pregnant. Not yet. But Rachel's expression made me uncomfortable anyway. She leaned toward me. So what? She grinned. When are you two finally giving Mom and Dad a grandbaby? Everyone laughed. I smiled politely. We'll see. Rachel laughed. That's what everyone says. Daniel put his hand on my shoulder. Leave her alone. I'm just asking. Then she looked at me again. Actually, I have a question. What? If you ever have a daughter, what would you name her? I froze. It was such a simple question. But something about the way she asked it made me hesitate. I smiled. I don't know. Rachel laughed. Come on. You've definitely thought about it. I looked at Daniel. He knew. He knew about my list. He knew about Evelyn. But he didn't say anything. Rachel kept staring at me. Well, I finally shrugged. Maybe Evelyn. Rachel's eyebrows lifted. Evelyn? Yeah. She smiled. That's pretty. I nodded. And maybe Grace as the middle name. She repeated it. Evelyn Grace. I smiled. Yeah. Then she laughed. That's actually adorable. I didn't think anything of it. Not then. That was my mistake. 3 months later, Rachel called me. I was at work when her name appeared on my phone. I answered. Hey. Are you busy? A little. Can I ask you something? Sure. She sounded unusually excited. Jason and I have been talking. About baby names. I smiled. Are you pregnant? She laughed. No. Then she paused. But we're trying. I smiled. That's wonderful. Thanks. There was another pause. Then she said, we've actually chosen a name. Already? Yeah. What is it? She laughed. I think you're going to love it. I waited. Then she said, Evelyn Grace. My fingers went completely still on the keyboard. I thought I'd heard her wrong. What? Evelyn Grace. I stared at the screen. That's the name I told you. I know. She laughed. That's why I thought you'd understand. I didn't know what to say. Rachel. What? That name is really important to me. I know. Her voice became defensive. But you aren't pregnant. I sat back in my chair. That's not the point. Then what is? You asked me what I wanted to name my daughter. And you told me. Yes. And I loved it. There was a pause. Then she said something that stayed with me for years. You can't reserve a baby name. She hung up. I stared at my phone. For several minutes, I didn't move. That evening, I told Daniel. He was sitting on the couch watching television. Daniel. Yeah. Your brother and Rachel are using Evelyn Grace. He looked at me. What? I told Rachel about the name. When? At your parents' house. He frowned. Why would they use it? I don't know. He picked up his phone. I'll talk to Jason. No. He looked at me. Why not? Because I don't want this to become a family war. He nodded slowly. You sure? Yes. I tried to smile. Maybe I'll choose something else. But Daniel knew me well enough to see that I wasn't okay. He turned off the television. You don't have to give up something just because someone else took it. I looked at him. I know. But deep down, I didn't know what I was going to do. Because the problem wasn't really the name. It was what the name represented. I had shared something personal with Rachel. Something I'd been carrying quietly for years. And instead of respecting it, she had taken it. 2 weeks later, Rachel announced her pregnancy. The entire family was thrilled. My mother-in-law cried. Jason looked like the happiest man alive. Everyone hugged them. Everyone congratulated them. And then Rachel looked directly at me. She smiled. Almost triumphantly. I think we've decided on the name. My stomach tightened. She waited. Then she said it. Evelyn Grace. Everyone cheered. My mother-in-law looked at me. Isn't that beautiful? I forced a smile. Yes. Rachel smiled wider. Claire actually suggested it to me. The room laughed. I laughed too. But something inside me went completely cold. Because Rachel hadn't simply chosen a name. She had taken something I'd trusted her with. And then made me watch everyone celebrate her for it. I excused myself and went into the bathroom. I locked the door. I looked at myself in the mirror. I was angry. Embarrassed. Hurt. But more than anything, I was disappointed in myself. Because I had made one mistake. I had assumed that. Because someone was family, they would treat my private dreams with the same care I treated theirs. I wiped my eyes. Then I opened my phone. I went to the baby name list. There were 20 names. I stared at them. Then something caught my attention. 2 names I'd almost forgotten. Names Rachel had never heard. Names I had never mentioned to anyone. I smiled. Not because I had a plan. Not yet. But because suddenly, I realized something. Rachel thought she had taken my only choice. She hadn't. She had simply shown me exactly what kind of game she wanted to play. And if she wanted to play it, I was going to make sure I knew the rules. The next morning, I woke up with a decision. I wasn't going to confront Rachel. Not yet. I wasn't going to tell the family how hurt I was. And I definitely wasn't going to beg her to change the name. Because something about her behavior had bothered me more than the name itself. She hadn't accidentally chosen Evelyn Grace. She had known. She had asked me specifically. She had remembered. And then she had announced it in front of everyone. That wasn't coincidence. That was a choice. So I made one of my own. I would say nothing. At least for now. A few days later, Daniel and I went to his parents' house for dinner. Rachel was already there. She was glowing. Everyone was talking about the pregnancy. Mom had bought tiny baby clothes. Jason was showing everyone pictures from their latest doctor's appointment. Rachel sat comfortably in the middle of it all. Then she looked at me. "Claire, I wanted to ask you something." I smiled. "What? Would you help me choose the nursery colors?" I almost laughed. She had stolen my name and now wanted my help decorating the nursery. "Sure," I said. She smiled. "I knew you'd understand." I didn't respond. Instead, I looked around the room. Nobody knew what had happened between us. Nobody knew she'd taken the name from my private list. And I wasn't going to tell them. Not because I was protecting Rachel. Because I didn't want my hurt turned into family entertainment. After dinner, Rachel followed me into the kitchen. "Are you mad at me?" I continued rinsing a plate. "No. You seem different." "I'm tired." She leaned against the counter. "I hope you're not still upset about the name." I turned around. "Why would I be?" She smiled. "Because you loved it first." There it was. The truth. She knew exactly what she'd done. I dried my hands. "You said it yourself." "What?" "You can't reserve a baby name." Rachel smiled. "Exactly." I nodded. "Then we're fine." She looked slightly disappointed. "Really? Really?" She smiled. "Good." Then she walked away. I watched her leave. And I realized something. Rachel expected me to fight. She wanted an argument. She wanted me to say the name belonged to me. Because then she could tell everyone I was jealous of her pregnancy. Instead, I gave her nothing. 3 weeks later, the family hosted a small baby shower. Rachel had chosen a beautiful theme. White flowers. Gold decorations. Tiny photographs of baby animals. And on a large sign above the gift table were the words, "Welcome baby Evelyn Grace." I stared at it. For a second, I felt like someone had punched me. That was my grandmother's name. My mother's middle name. A name I'd carried privately for years. And now it was hanging above a room full of people celebrating someone else's daughter. I took a breath. Then smiled. "Beautiful," I said. Rachel looked at me. "You really think so?" "Yes." She hugged me. "Thank you for being happy for me." I hugged her back. But inside, I had already made my decision. That night, after the shower, I sat beside Daniel in our car. He was driving. Neither of us spoke for several minutes. Finally, he said, "You don't have to pretend with me." I looked out the window. "I'm not." "Claire." I sighed. "I hate that she took it." "I know." "I hate that she knew what it meant." "I know." "And I hate that everyone thinks this is some cute coincidence." Daniel reached over and squeezed my hand. "You still want the name?" I looked at him. "Yes." "Then keep it." I smiled sadly. "But what if they have a daughter first? Then they have an Evelyn. And if we have one later, then we have an Evelyn too." I laughed. "That would be awkward." "Maybe." He smiled. "But you know what would be worse?" "What?" "Giving up a name you love because someone else behaved badly." I looked at him. He was right. I just didn't know how right he was yet. Months passed. Rachel's pregnancy became the center of every family conversation. Every weekend brought a new update. The baby's room was finished. The stroller arrived. The crib was assembled. The name was officially announced. Evelyn Grace Bennett. Every time I heard it, I felt that same little sting. But I stopped reacting. Instead, I focused on my own life. My work. My marriage. Our home. And the possibility that maybe, someday, Daniel and I would have a child of our own. One evening, while cleaning out an old drawer, I found my baby name list again. I opened it. The original 20 names were still there. But beneath them were the 2 names I'd noticed that night. Names I had never told Rachel. Names connected to stories from Daniel's side of the family. I looked at them for a long time. Then I smiled. I knew exactly what I was going to do. Not revenge. Not yet. Just patience. Because Rachel had made one assumption that I intended to let her keep making. She thought she'd taken my favorite name. She thought I'd surrendered. She thought I'd never use it. And I wasn't going to correct her. Because sometimes, the most powerful response to someone taking what they think you value most is letting them believe they've won. Until the moment they discover you were never playing the same game. By the time Rachel reached her 8th month of pregnancy, everyone in the family was obsessed with one thing. The baby. Every conversation eventually returned to Evelyn. What she would look like. Whose eyes she would have. Whether she'd have Jason's smile. What nursery she'd sleep in. Even what her first birthday party might look like. I listened. I smiled. I congratulated them. And I kept my mouth shut. Because I'd learned something important. When someone wants to provoke you, silence can be more powerful than an argument. Rachel never mentioned our conversation about the name again. But occasionally, I caught her watching me. Almost as if she was checking whether I was still upset. I always smiled. That seemed to bother her more than anger would have. One Saturday afternoon, I was helping Mom arrange flowers for the baby shower when Rachel walked into the room. She was carrying a stack of invitations. Look. She handed one to Mom. Mom smiled. It's beautiful. Rachel looked at me. What do you think? I examined it. The front said, "Celebrating baby Evelyn Grace." It's lovely. Rachel smiled. Thanks. Then she lowered her voice. I was worried you might feel weird about it. I looked at her. Why would I? She shrugged. I don't know. I smiled. I'm happy for you. She studied my face. Then nodded. Good. She walked away. Mom watched her. Then looked at me. You really are okay, aren't you? I hesitated. Yes. It wasn't completely true. But it wasn't completely false either. I was learning to separate what hurt me from what controlled me. Rachel had hurt me, but she wasn't going to control my life. The baby arrived 2 weeks early. A beautiful little girl. Healthy. Tiny. Perfect. The family was ecstatic. Daniel and I visited the hospital the next morning. Rachel was exhausted but glowing. She held the baby in her arms. Meet Evelyn. I looked down at the little girl. She had dark hair. Tiny fingers. A tiny pink mouth. I smiled. She's beautiful. Rachel smiled. Thank you. Then she looked at me. I hope you're not uncomfortable. I knew exactly what she meant. I shook my head. No. She looked relieved. Good. I reached out and gently touched the baby's tiny hand. Welcome to the family, Evelyn. For a moment, I felt something unexpected. Not anger. Not jealousy. Just sadness. Because this little girl had done nothing wrong. She deserved to grow up without carrying the weight of an adult disagreement. I smiled at her and silently promised myself, whatever happened between Rachel and me would never become her burden. 6 months later, something changed. Daniel came home from work one evening unusually quiet. I looked at him. "What's wrong?" "Nothing." "You're lying." He smiled. "Maybe." Then he sat beside me. "We should talk." My heart skipped. "About what?" He took my hand. "Kids." I stared at him. "We've talked about kids." "I know. But I think I'm ready." I didn't answer. He continued. "I've been ready for a while." I smiled. "So have I." He squeezed my hand. "Then maybe we should stop waiting." That night, we talked for hours. About finances, our careers, our home, what kind of parents we wanted to be. And eventually, names. Daniel smiled. "Do you still have that list?" I laughed. "Of course." "How many names?" 22. 22? 24 now. He shook his head. "You're impossible." I opened my phone. We went through them together. Some made us laugh. Some were immediately rejected. Some sounded beautiful but didn't feel right. Then we reached the 2 names I'd never told anyone about. Daniel looked at me. "I forgot about these." I didn't. He smiled. "Which one do you love?" I looked at the screen. Then I said it. The name that had been sitting quietly in my heart for months. Daniel smiled. "I love it." "So do I." We didn't announce it. We didn't tell our parents. We didn't tell our friends. We didn't tell anyone. Because this time, the name was staying between us. A year later, I was pregnant. The day I found out, I sat on the bathroom floor staring at the test. 2 lines. I started laughing. Then crying. Then laughing again. Daniel came running. "What happened?" I held up the test. He froze. Then smiled. "Are you serious?" I nodded. He picked me up and spun me around. For the first time in months, I completely forgot about Rachel. About Evelyn. About the stolen name. All I could think about was the tiny life growing inside me. We waited 12 weeks before telling the family. When we finally announced the pregnancy, everyone celebrated. Mom cried. Dad hugged Daniel. Jason congratulated us. Rachel smiled. Then she asked the question everyone eventually asks. "Have you picked a name?" I looked at Daniel. He looked at me. We smiled. "We have." Rachel laughed. "Already?" "Yes." "What is it?" I placed my hand gently over my stomach. Then I smiled. "We'll announce it when the baby arrives." Rachel frowned slightly. "But you know it." "Absolutely." She laughed. "You're making us wait." I smiled. "Yes." She shook her head. "Fine." Everyone laughed. But I noticed something. Rachel's smile disappeared for just a second. Because she knew. She knew exactly what she'd done to me. And now, for the first time, she had no idea what I was planning to name my child. And that uncertainty bothered her. Much more than I expected. The next few months passed quickly. My pregnancy was going well. Daniel became almost ridiculously protective. He wouldn't let me carry grocery bags. He researched every ingredient in everything we ate. And every night, before going to sleep, he placed his hand gently on my stomach and talked to the baby. Sometimes I laughed at him. "She can't hear you yet." "She can hear me." She's the size of a peach. Then she's a very intelligent peach. I laughed. Those moments were the happiest I'd felt in years. For once, my life wasn't about Rachel. It wasn't about family drama. It wasn't about stolen names. It was about us. Our little family. But Rachel kept asking about the name. At first, it was casual. So, have you changed your mind? No. Still keeping it secret? Yes. She laughed. Then, a few weeks later. At least give me a hint. No. Does it start with a vowel? No. Is it traditional? Maybe. Is it a family name? I smiled. Possibly. She groaned. You're impossible. I laughed. But I noticed something. She wasn't asking because she was curious. She was trying to find out whether we'd chosen something she could claim. Again. One afternoon, I received a message from her. Rachel, can we talk? I stared at it. Then replied. Sure. She called immediately. Are you alone? Yes. I wanted to apologize. I wasn't expecting that. For what? For the name. I leaned back. What about it? I know I shouldn't have taken it. The word taken caught my attention. You said you couldn't reserve a name. I know. So what changed? She sighed. I didn't realize how much it meant to you. I was quiet. She continued. When you told me about Evelyn Grace, I thought it was beautiful. I wanted it immediately. Yes. I didn't think about how you'd feel. I looked down. That was the problem. I know. There was a long silence. Then she said, I'm sorry. I believed that she was sorry. But I wasn't sure what she was sorry for. Hurting me? Or losing control of the situation? I didn't know. So I simply said, thank you. She breathed out. Does that mean we're okay? We're trying. She laughed softly. Fair enough. Then she asked. So? I smiled despite myself. What? Are you going to tell me your baby's name? I laughed. No. Seriously? Seriously. She groaned. You're killing me. Good. We both laughed. For a moment, everything felt normal. Then she said something that changed the mood. If it's a girl, I hope you don't use Evelyn. I froze. Why? Because. She hesitated. That's my daughter's name. I stared at the wall. There it was. The real reason for the apology. Rachel didn't want to lose ownership of the name. I spoke calmly. I haven't said I'm using Evelyn. I know. Then why are you worried? I'm not. You are. She didn't answer. I smiled sadly. Rachel, your daughter is Evelyn. That's not going to change. Okay. And if I have a daughter? She interrupted. I just don't want confusion. I understand. But inside, something clicked. Rachel still believed she had the right to control what I named my child. She didn't. And I wasn't going to argue with her. A few weeks later, we had our anatomy scan. Daniel and I sat together in the doctor's office. The technician moved the scanner across my stomach. Then she smiled. I think we have an answer. Daniel squeezed my hand. Boy or girl? The technician smiled. It's a girl. Daniel's eyes filled with tears. I started crying too. A daughter. Our daughter. For a few seconds, the world disappeared. There was only that tiny heartbeat. That tiny movement on the screen. Our baby. Our future. When we got home, Daniel opened the baby name list. Ready? I nodded. He scrolled to the name we'd chosen months earlier. We looked at each other. Then he said it aloud. Lillian Rose. I smiled. It was perfect. Lillian was my grandfather's mother's name. Rose was Daniel's grandmother's name. Two people who had shaped our families long before Rachel ever entered our lives. Two names that belonged to our history. Not Rachel's. Not anyone else's. Ours. I placed my hand over my stomach. Lillian. Daniel smiled. Our little Lillian. For the first time, the name felt real. We decided not to announce it yet. But Rachel somehow found out that we had chosen a name. She called me that evening. You picked one, didn't you? Yes. Girl's name? Yes. Tell me. No. Claire. Rachel. Please. I laughed. No. She became quiet. Then said, Does it start with L? I froze. Why would you ask that? Just guessing. I smiled. Good guess. She immediately laughed. So it does. I realized my mistake. Maybe. Claire. I laughed. Good night, Rachel. I hung up. Daniel was standing in the doorway. Did you tell her? No. Did you almost tell her? Maybe. He laughed. Then his expression became serious. Whatever happens. What? We don't let anyone turn this baby into another family competition. I looked at him. You're right. I placed both hands over my stomach. We won't. I believed that. At least I thought I did. Because 2 weeks later, Rachel sent a message to the entire family. It contained a photograph of her daughter. And underneath it, she wrote, Our little Evelyn is going to be a big cousin soon. Everyone responded with hearts. Congratulations. Excited messages. Then Rachel sent one more message. I can't wait to see what Claire and Daniel name their little girl. I stared at the screen. Then I noticed something else. A private message from Rachel appeared immediately afterward. Please don't choose anything too close to Evelyn. I read it twice. Then I put my phone down. For the first time. I wasn't hurt. I wasn't angry. I was simply certain. Rachel had no idea what was coming. And this time, I wasn't going to hide it forever. By the time I reached my 8th month of pregnancy, everyone in the family had become obsessed with one question. What are you naming the baby? Every time someone asked. I smiled. We'll tell you when she's born. That answer became a running joke. My mother-in-law called me the keeper of secrets. Jason joked that Daniel and I were going to name the baby something ridiculous. Even my father-in-law tried bribing us with dinner. Nothing worked. We kept Lillian Rose between us. It wasn't because we were afraid Rachel would steal it. Not anymore. It was because we'd decided something simple. Our daughter's name wasn't a family vote. It wasn't a competition. It wasn't something anyone else needed to approve. It was hers. Then Rachel started behaving strangely. She began asking Daniel questions. Not directly about the name. She was more subtle. So, does Claire like classic names? Daniel smiled. Sometimes. Does she like old-fashioned names? Why? I'm just curious. He laughed. You'll have to ask her. Rachel nodded. Then she asked another question. Does she like L names? Daniel stopped smiling. Why? Rachel shrugged. I don't know. Just wondering. That evening, Daniel told me about the conversation. I laughed. She's guessing. She seems determined. Let her guess. But I could tell Daniel was concerned. Claire, what if she does something? Like what? I don't know. I smiled. She already stole Evelyn. What else could she do? Neither of us knew the answer. 2 weeks later, Rachel invited me over. She said she wanted to show me something. When I arrived, she led me into the nursery. The room was beautiful. Soft pink walls. White furniture. A large wooden sign above the crib. Evelyn Grace. I smiled politely. It's beautiful. Rachel looked at the sign. I wanted to ask you something. Okay. If your daughter is born and you name her Lillian. I froze. She continued. Wouldn't that be weird? I looked at her. We haven't told you our name. You didn't have to. I stared at her. What does that mean? She smiled. I figured it out. How? You mentioned the letter L. I laughed. That was a guess. Maybe. Then she stepped closer. I just don't want our daughters to have matching initials. I shook my head. They're cousins. Rachel. Exactly. Families have children with the same initials all the time. I know. But. She crossed her arms. I just don't like it. I stared at her. You don't get to decide. Her expression hardened. I know. Then why are we having this conversation? She didn't answer. Finally, I said, Rachel, we're naming our daughter Lillian Rose. Her eyes widened. You really are? Yes. She looked genuinely shocked. You knew I'd be upset. I knew you might be. Then why would you do it? I smiled calmly. Because I love the name. She stared at me. Then whispered. But I already used Evelyn. I nodded. And I didn't ask you to change it. She looked confused. What? You chose Evelyn? Yes. Then it's yours. I paused. Lillian is ours. She didn't say anything. I could see the anger building in her face. Finally, she said. So this is revenge? No. It feels like revenge. I shook my head. If I wanted revenge, I would have chosen Evelyn. She stared at me. Then why Lillian? Because it's a name we love. And because nobody gets to steal something from us twice. She looked away. I picked up my purse. I'm going home. Claire. I stopped. Do you really want to do this? I turned around. Do what? Create drama between our daughters before they're even born. I looked at her carefully. No. Then change it. I smiled. No. She stared at me. I continued. Because changing my daughter's name to keep you comfortable would teach her the wrong lesson. What lesson? That someone else gets to decide what belongs to her. Rachel's face changed. She didn't expect that answer. I walked toward the door. Before leaving, I turned around. And Rachel? What? You taught me that baby names can't be reserved. She said nothing. So I'm finally taking your advice. Then I left. The next morning, the family group chat exploded. Rachel had told everyone. Claire is deliberately using a name with the same initial as Evelyn just to upset me. Within minutes, messages appeared. Mom asked what happened. Jason told everyone to calm down. My mother-in-law called me. Claire, what's going on? I explained everything. The conversation at the nursery. The name. The years-old incident with Evelyn. When I finished, there was silence. Then she said something I never expected. I remember you telling Rachel that name. I froze. You do? Yes. Why didn't you say anything? I didn't want to get involved. I smiled sadly. I understand. She sighed. But Claire. Yes. I think Rachel needs to understand that she can't control this. I looked down. Thank you. That evening, Rachel sent me one final message. Fine. Name your daughter whatever you want. I stared at it. Then another message appeared. But don't expect me to pretend I like it. I smiled. I typed one sentence. You don't have to. Then I put my phone away. For the first time since Rachel had stolen my original name, I felt completely free. Because this wasn't about winning anymore. It was about refusing to lose myself just to keep someone else comfortable. And soon, our little girl would arrive. And when she did, she would have the name we had chosen with love. Lillian Rose. For the next few weeks, Rachel kept her distance. She didn't call. She didn't text. She barely spoke to me at family gatherings. Honestly, I was relieved. My pregnancy had become peaceful again. Daniel and I spent our evenings preparing the nursery. We painted the walls. We assembled the crib. We folded tiny clothes into drawers. And on one shelf, we placed a small wooden plaque. Lillian Rose. Every time I looked at it, I smiled. It wasn't just a name anymore. It was our daughter. Our future. Our decision. Then, one Friday evening, my water broke. I was standing in the kitchen when I suddenly felt a warm rush. I froze. Daniel. He came running from the living room. What happened? I think. I looked down. Oh my God. His face changed instantly. Is it time? I nodded. Call the hospital. Within minutes, we were in the car. Daniel was nervous. I was terrified. But underneath the fear was something else. Excitement. Our daughter was coming. The labor lasted for hours. There were moments when I thought I couldn't do it. Then finally, I heard the cry. A tiny, powerful cry. The nurse placed her on my chest. I looked down. She was perfect. Tiny fingers. Soft dark hair. Eyes tightly closed. I started crying. Daniel stood beside me, tears running down his face. She's beautiful. I whispered. Hi, Lillian. Daniel smiled. Our Lillian. And in that moment, every argument about names disappeared. There was only her. A few hours later, we sent the announcement to the family. A simple photograph. Her tiny hand wrapped around my finger. And beneath it, welcome to the world, Lillian Rose. The responses came immediately. Mom sent 20 heart emojis. Dad called. Daniel's parents cried. Jason congratulated us. Then I saw Rachel's message. There was no congratulations. No heart. Just. You actually used it. I stared at the screen. Daniel saw the message. Don't answer. I nodded. I didn't. The next morning, Rachel arrived at the hospital. I was surprised. She stood in the doorway holding a small gift bag. Can I come in? I nodded. She walked toward the bed. Her eyes went immediately to the baby. Lillian. I smiled. Yes. She looked at me. Then at the baby. I brought something. She handed me the bag. Inside was a tiny white blanket embroidered with flowers. I looked at it. It's beautiful. I made it. I looked at her. You. She nodded. I've been working on it for weeks. That surprised me. Thank you. She sat beside me. For a moment. Neither of us spoke. Then she said, I was angry. I know. I thought you were doing it to hurt me. I wasn't. I know that now. I looked at her. She stared at the baby. She's beautiful. Thank you. Rachel reached out and gently touched Lillian's hand. The baby's fingers curled around hers. Rachel's eyes filled with tears. She's so tiny. She is. Rachel took a breath. I'm sorry. I knew immediately what she meant. The name. She nodded. I shouldn't have taken Evelyn from you. I didn't respond. She continued. I kept telling myself that names couldn't belong to anyone. She looked at me. But I knew how much it meant to you. I nodded slowly. That's what hurt. I know. She looked down. I was jealous. Of me. Of you. I was surprised. Why? Because you always seemed so sure of yourself. She laughed sadly. I thought if I took something you loved, I'd somehow feel less insecure. I looked at her. Did it work? She shook her head. No. She stood up. I don't expect you to forget. I won't. I don't expect you to forgive me today. I already forgive you. She looked surprised. Really? I smiled. Forgiveness doesn't mean I forget. She nodded. I understand. Then she looked at Lillian again. Can I hold her? I hesitated. Then nodded. Rachel carefully lifted my daughter into her arms. She looked terrified. She's so small. Support her head. I know. She laughed nervously. Lillian opened her eyes. Rachel stared at her. Then whispered. Hi, Lillian. I watched them. And suddenly I understood something. The name Rachel had stolen had never been the thing that mattered most. It was the trust. The privacy. The feeling that something I'd shared with family was safe. That was what had been broken. And that was what would take time to rebuild. Before Rachel left, she placed Lillian back in my arms. I want you to know something. What? I'll never do that again. I smiled. I hope you don't. She walked toward the door. Then stopped. Claire. Yes. Thank you for letting me meet her. I smiled. She's your niece. Rachel nodded. Yeah. Then she left. I looked down at my daughter. Daniel came over and kissed my forehead. How are you feeling? I smiled. Tired. He laughed. Anything else? I looked at Lillian. Peaceful. He smiled. I gently touched her tiny cheek. The name I'd chosen years ago had been stolen. But that didn't matter anymore. Because I had learned something far more valuable. People can copy your choices. They can take your ideas. They can even try to make your memories feel like theirs. But they cannot take the meaning you give your own life. And nobody, not Rachel, not anyone, could ever take my daughter from me. Lillian Rose was finally here. And she was exactly where she belonged. 3 months. After Lillian was born, something unexpected happened. Rachel called me. Not to ask about the baby. Not to complain. Not to apologize. She simply said, Claire, can I come over? I immediately knew something was wrong. Of course. She arrived 20 minutes later. She looked nervous. The moment she sat down, I handed her a cup of coffee. She barely touched it. I need to tell you something. I waited. About Evelyn. My heart tightened slightly. What about her? Rachel looked down at her hands. The name wasn't the only thing I took. I stared at her. What do you mean? She swallowed. I took something else from you years ago. I couldn't imagine what she meant. Rachel. What are you talking about? She looked directly at me. Your idea. What idea? The business. I froze. My business? She continued. Do you remember when you first started talking about opening your design studio? I nodded slowly. Yes. You told me everything. I told you a lot. I know. She looked away. And I repeated your ideas to Jason. My stomach tightened. Why? Because I thought they were stupid. I stared at her. But Jason didn't. She paused. He thought it was a great idea. I remembered. Years earlier, Jason had suddenly started asking me questions about my business. Questions I hadn't understood at the time. What services I offered. How I found clients. How much I charged. What software I used. I had assumed he was simply curious. Apparently, he wasn't. Rachel continued. Jason wanted to start something similar. Did he? Yes. But he never did. She shook her head. Because he couldn't figure out how to make it work. I sat silently. Then she said. And that's when I realized something. What? Your ideas weren't stupid. I smiled bitterly. I never thought they were. She nodded. I know. There was a long silence. Then she whispered. I was jealous of you. Again. The same word. Jealous. It had been behind the name. And apparently behind other things too. I looked at her. Why didn't you ever just tell me? Because I was embarrassed. About being jealous. About feeling like I was always behind you. I sighed. Rachel, you weren't behind me. I felt like I was. She wiped her eyes. Everyone compared us. I thought about it. Maybe she was right. Their parents had compared the brothers. Relatives had compared the wives. Family gatherings had quietly turned into competitions. Who had the better job? Who had the nicer house? Who was more successful? Who was more confident? I had ignored most of it. Rachel hadn't. She had absorbed every comparison. And eventually, she started competing against me. Even when I wasn't competing against her. She looked at me. I thought taking Evelyn would make me feel like I finally had something you wanted. I said nothing. But when you named your daughter Lillian, she smiled sadly. I realized how ridiculous I'd been. Why? Because you didn't fight me. I frowned. What? You could have caused a huge family argument. Yes. You could have told everyone what I did. Yes. But you didn't. I looked down. I didn't want revenge. I know. She took a deep breath. And that's when I realized I was the only person still keeping score. That sentence stayed with me. Because it was true. Rachel stood. I can't undo what I did. No. But I can stop doing it. I nodded. That's all you can do. She smiled. How's Lillian? Perfect. Can I see her? Of course. I took her upstairs. Lillian was sleeping in her crib. Rachel stood beside her. She didn't touch her. She simply watched. Then she whispered. She's beautiful. She is. Rachel smiled. Do you know what I think? What? I think Lillian and Evelyn are going to be good friends. I smiled. I hope so. And maybe. She hesitated. Maybe we can stop teaching them that family is a competition. I looked at her. That sounds like a good idea. Rachel nodded. Then she walked downstairs. At the door. She turned around. Claire. Yes. I'm sorry I made you feel like you had to protect everything you loved from me. I looked at her. then smiled. "Thank you." She left. I closed the door, and for the first time, I didn't feel like I had to watch my back. Maybe the lesson wasn't that people would never hurt us. Maybe the lesson was learning who deserved another chance, and who simply deserved forgiveness from a distance. I looked toward the stairs. Upstairs, my daughter was sleeping peacefully. Her name was still Lillian Rose. Rachel's daughter was still Evelyn Grace. And somehow, there was enough room in this family for both. Because a name was never something that needed to be won. It was something that needed to be loved. For the first time in months, things between Rachel and me felt normal. Not perfect. Not the way they had been before. But normal enough. We stopped avoiding each other at family gatherings. We talked. We laughed occasionally. And most importantly, we stopped competing. Evelyn and Lillian were growing up together. They were only a few months apart, but already they seemed fascinated by each other. Whenever they were in the same room, Lillian would stare at Evelyn. Evelyn would stare back. Then one of them would laugh. And suddenly everyone else would laugh too. Watching them made me realize how ridiculous the entire conflict had been. Two little girls didn't care who had chosen which name first. They didn't care who was more successful. They didn't care who had the better house. They simply wanted to play. One afternoon, I was sitting in the backyard while the girls played with bubbles. Rachel sat beside me. She watched them for a while. Then she said, "They really like each other." I smiled. "They do." Rachel laughed. "Imagine if we had kept fighting." I shook my head. "They would have grown up thinking they had to." She looked at me. "You're right." For a few moments, we said nothing. Then Rachel asked, "Do you still hate me for what I did?" I thought carefully before answering. "No." She looked surprised. "I don't." "How?" I smiled. "Because I don't want to spend the rest of my life carrying anger over something that happened years ago." She nodded. "But you don't trust me completely." "No." She laughed softly. "Fair." I looked at her. "Trust isn't something you ask for. What is it?" "You earn it." She nodded. "And I know I have work to do." "Yes." "But you'll give me the chance." I smiled. "If you keep showing me I can." She nodded. "Deal." That evening, after Rachel left, Daniel and I sat on the porch. He looked at me. "You two seem better." "We are." "I'm glad." I looked toward the backyard. "Lillian and Evelyn don't know any of this. They don't need to." "Exactly." Daniel smiled. Then he asked, "Do you ever regret using Lillian?" I looked at him. "No. Not even a little." I shook my head. "I didn't use the name to hurt Rachel." "I know. I used it because it was ours." Daniel smiled. "And because you loved it." "Exactly." He took my hand. "You know what I think?" "What?" "You finally stopped letting Rachel decide how you feel." I thought about that. He was right. For years, Rachel's choices had determined my emotions. If she succeeded, I felt threatened. If she copied me, I felt violated. If she criticized me, I felt defensive. If she apologized, I wondered whether I could trust her. But eventually, I realized I had given her too much power. Not because she was powerful. Because I kept allowing her behavior to control my peace. That had changed. A few weeks later, Rachel surprised me. She arrived at my house carrying a small box. "What is that?" "Something I owe you." I opened it. Inside was an old notebook. I recognized it immediately. My handwriting was on the first page. I stared at Rachel. "Where did you get this?" She looked embarrassed. "I took it years ago." I flipped through the pages. It contained my original business ideas, my early plans, my sketches, my notes, everything I'd written when I was trying to figure out what kind of company I wanted to build. I looked at her. "You kept this?" "Yes." "Why?" "I don't know." She paused. "Maybe because I knew you were going to succeed." I closed the notebook. "Rachel, I'm not asking for anything." She pushed the box toward me. "It's yours." I looked down. There was something strangely emotional about getting it back. Not because the notebook was valuable, but because it represented a younger version of me. A woman who had been excited about her future. A woman who trusted people easily. A woman who hadn't yet learned that some people could turn your dreams into weapons. I held the notebook against my chest. "Thank you." Rachel smiled. "You're welcome." That night, I placed the notebook in my office. Next to it, I put a photograph of Lillian. Then I thought about everything that had happened. The stolen business idea. The stolen baby name. The arguments. The jealousy. The resentment. And finally, the forgiveness. I realized something. Rachel hadn't stolen my life. She had only borrowed pieces of it. The name. The ideas. The attention. But none of those things had ever belonged to her. They belonged to me because of the meaning I gave them. And when I finally stopped fighting over them, I became free. Years later, Lillian would ask me why she had that name. I'd tell her about her great-grandmother. I'd tell her about the family history. I'd tell her about the woman whose name had inspired hers. And someday, if she asked about Evelyn, I'd tell her that her cousin had a beautiful name too. I'd never tell her that her aunt once stole a name from her mother. Because that wasn't her story. It was ours. Adults made mistakes. Adults carried jealousy. Adults sometimes competed when they shouldn't. But children shouldn't inherit those battles. They deserve something better. A clean beginning. I looked at the two girls playing together. Lillian was holding a bubble wand. Evelyn was chasing the bubbles. They were laughing. Neither knew that their mothers had once fought over names. Neither cared. And that was exactly how it should be. I smiled. The name I had once thought was stolen from me had eventually led me to something I never expected. A lesson. You don't protect what you love by controlling it. You protect it by knowing its value. And sometimes, the best revenge isn't making someone regret hurting you. It's building a life so peaceful that what they did no longer has the power to hurt you. 5 years passed. Lillian was 5 years old. Evelyn was 5.5. And somehow, they had become inseparable. They had sleepovers. They shared toys. They fought over crayons. They laughed at things adults didn't understand. And whenever someone asked them what their favorite thing about being cousins was, they always gave the same answer. Everything. Watching them together sometimes made me emotional. Because I knew how differently their story could have gone. If Rachel and I had continued fighting, the girls would have grown up hearing about it. They would have learned which aunt was right. Which mother had been hurt. Which family member had stolen something. Instead, we had chosen something better. We had chosen to end the competition with us. One afternoon, I was cleaning the kitchen when Lillian ran inside. "Mom." I turned around. "What happened?" She was holding a drawing. "Look." I smiled. It was a picture of two little girls holding hands. Above them were two names. Lillian Evelyn. I crouched down. This is beautiful. She smiled. We're best friends. I know. Mom. Yes. Why did you give me my name? I froze for a second. The question I'd known would eventually come. I smiled. Because I loved it. Why? Because it belonged to someone very special in our family. Who? I told her about my grandmother. About her kindness. About how she always made everyone feel safe. Lillian listened carefully. Then she asked, did Aunt Rachel name Evelyn because she loved someone too? I smiled. Yes. Who? I don't know. She thought about it. Then smiled. Her name is pretty too. I hugged her. Yes. It is. She ran outside again. I watched her disappear into the backyard. And I realized something. The names had never been enemies. We had been. Adults had created a competition where two beautiful names could have simply existed together. That evening, Rachel came over. The girls were playing in the living room. Rachel sat beside me. I heard what Lillian asked you. I smiled. She has a lot of questions. She does. Rachel looked at the girls. Sometimes I think about how stupid I was. I looked at her. Don't. She frowned. Why? Because you were wrong. She nodded. But you're not the same person anymore. She smiled. Neither are you. No. I looked toward the girls. I think that's the best part. Rachel reached into her purse. I brought something. She handed me a small envelope. Inside was a photograph. It showed Rachel and me when we were teenagers. We were standing together at a family wedding. Both of us were laughing. Neither of us looked like the people we'd eventually become. I stared at the photograph. I remember this. Rachel smiled. We were happy. We were. What happened? I looked at her. Life. She nodded. Maybe. Then she said something that surprised me. Maybe we spent too much time trying to become the person everyone expected us to be. I thought about that. Maybe she was right. Maybe all those comparisons had slowly turned us against each other. She was the successful one. I was the responsible one. She was the outgoing one. I was the ambitious one. Every label became another reason to compete. Until one day, we forgot we were family. I looked at Rachel. I'm glad we stopped. So am I. She smiled. And I'm glad you used Lillian. I laughed. Really? Yes. Why? Because if you hadn't, I might never have realized how ridiculous I was being. I smiled. You really hated the name at first. I did. And now? She looked at the girls. Now I can't imagine her being anything else. I smiled. Me neither. That night, after Rachel left, I sat alone in the nursery. The room had changed over the years. There were toys everywhere. Books on the floor. Drawings taped to the walls. A small bed where Lillian slept. I looked at the wooden plaque above it. Lillian Rose. I remembered the first time I told Rachel that name. I remembered her taking Evelyn. I remembered the anger. The hurt. The arguments. And then I smiled. Because if I could go back, I wouldn't change the name. I wouldn't change my response. I wouldn't change anything. Not because the experience was pleasant, but because it taught me something I needed to learn. My happiness cannot depend on whether someone else respects my choices. I can ask for respect. I can establish boundaries. I can walk away. But ultimately, I decide what has meaning in my life. I closed the nursery door. Downstairs, Daniel was waiting for me, ready for bed. I smiled. Almost. He kissed my forehead. Everything okay? I nodded. Everything is better than okay. He smiled. Good. I looked around our home. Our photographs. Our daughter's toys. Our life. A life we'd built ourselves. Not by winning against anyone. Not by proving anyone wrong. But by refusing to let other people's jealousy determine our future. And that was when I finally understood the truth. Rachel never really stole my baby name. She only repeated 2 words I'd once trusted her with. I was the one who gave them their meaning. And I was the one who got to decide what they meant to me. Evelyn Grace belonged to Rachel's daughter. Lillian Rose belonged to mine. And there was nothing left to fight about. Because sometimes, the greatest victory isn't getting back what someone took. It's realizing you never lost yourself in the first place. A few months later, our family gathered for Thanksgiving. It was the first big family dinner we'd had in years where nobody was walking on eggshells. Mom was cooking. Dad was telling his usual terrible jokes. Jason was helping Daniel set the table. Rachel was in the kitchen with me. And the girls were running through the house together. Lillian, Evelyn. Their laughter echoed down the hallway. Rachel smiled. They never stop. I laughed. Neither did we. She looked at me. That's true. For a moment, we simply stood there. Then Rachel said, "Do you remember the first time I told you I was using Evelyn Grace?" I smiled. Unfortunately. She laughed. I was so proud of myself. I know. I actually thought I'd won. Won what? She shrugged. Against you. I looked at her. There was never a competition. I know that now. She sighed. I wish I'd known it then. I put a plate on the counter. Maybe we both needed to grow up. Rachel smiled. Probably. At dinner, Dad raised his glass. To family. Everyone lifted their glasses. I looked around the table. Mom. Dad. Jason. Rachel. Daniel. And me. The people who had caused the biggest problems in my life were sitting beside me. But strangely, I wasn't angry. I didn't feel like I had to forgive anyone in that moment. I simply felt grateful. Not for the pain, for what came after it. Because without those difficult years, I might never have learned how important boundaries were. I might never have learned that forgiveness didn't require forgetting. And I might never have understood that family could be rebuilt. Not by pretending nothing happened, but by acknowledging what happened and choosing to do better. After dinner, the girls came running into the room. Mom. Mom. They were both holding something. What happened? Lillian held up a drawing. We made this for you. I took it. It was a picture of our entire family. Everyone was drawn with giant heads and tiny bodies. I laughed. Why does Dad have such big ears? Lillian giggled. Because he does. Daniel protested from across the room. I absolutely do not. Everyone laughed. Then I noticed something. At the bottom of the drawing, the girls had written their names. Lillian Rose. Evelyn Grace. Side by side. I looked at Rachel. She looked at me. Neither of us said anything. We didn't need to. Later that night, after everyone left, I put the drawing on the refrigerator. I stood there for a long time. Those 2 names had once represented betrayal, jealousy, competition, pain. Now they represented two little girls who loved each other. That was the final transformation. The thing Rachel had once used to hurt me had become something completely different. Not because the past changed, because we changed. A few days later, Rachel called me. "I have news." "What happened?" "I'm pregnant." I smiled. "Seriously?" "Yes." "Congratulations." She laughed. "Thank you." Then she said, "And I already have a name." I laughed. "Of course you do." She laughed too. "Don't worry." "What?" "I'm not stealing yours." We both burst out laughing. Then she said, "I actually wanted to ask you something." "What?" "Would you help me choose the middle name?" I paused. Years ago, that question would have terrified me. Now it made me smile. "Of course." She laughed. "Really? Really? Thank you." We talked for almost an hour. Names. Meanings. Family traditions. We rejected dozens. Then eventually, Rachel found one she loved. She said it quietly. I repeated it. "It sounds beautiful." That's what I thought. And just like that, something that had once divided us became something that brought us closer. When I hung up, Daniel walked into the room. "What was that about?" "Rachel's having another baby." He smiled. "That's great." She asked me to help choose the middle name. He looked at me. "Wow." I laughed. "I know. How do you feel?" I thought about it. Then smiled. "Happy." He nodded. "That's good." I looked at the refrigerator, at the girls' drawing, at their names, and I realized something. Healing doesn't always feel dramatic. Sometimes healing is simply realizing that something which once made you angry no longer has the power to do so. No tears. No revenge. No confrontation. Just peace. Years ago, I thought Rachel had stolen my baby name. I thought she had taken something precious from me. But she hadn't. She had taught me something I would eventually teach my own daughter. Your identity doesn't disappear just because someone copies you. Someone can wear the same dress, use the same idea, choose the same name, follow the same path, but they can never become you. Because meaning comes from the life you build around those choices. And my daughter wasn't defined by her name. She was defined by who she became. Kind, confident, loving, strong, and completely herself. That was all I'd ever wanted. That night, I kissed Lillian goodnight. "Mom." "Yes." "Do you like my name?" I smiled. "I love your name." "Why?" "Because it's yours." She smiled. Then she closed her eyes. I turned off the light. As I walked out of her room, I looked back one last time. The little wooden plaque above her bed read, "Lillian Rose." And I smiled. Because the woman who once thought her sister-in-law had stolen her most precious name had finally learned the truth. Nobody can steal what truly belongs to you. They can copy the words, but they can't copy the memories. They can't copy the love. They can't copy the life. And they certainly can't copy the person you become. I closed the door and walked downstairs. My family was waiting. Not the perfect family. Not the family I had imagined as a young woman. But the family we had chosen to become. And somehow, that was better. A year later, Rachel's second baby was born. A little boy. She named him Benjamin Thomas. And when she called me from the hospital, the first thing she said was, "I didn't steal this one." I burst out laughing. "I know." She laughed too. But underneath the joke was something deeper. We both remembered where we'd started. Two women who had turned something as innocent as a baby name into a competition. Two women who had spent years measuring themselves against each other. And now, we were simply sisters-in-law raising children in the same family. When I visited the hospital, Rachel handed me the baby. Careful. I know how to hold a baby. I know. She smiled. Sorry. I looked down at Benjamin. He's beautiful. Rachel watched me. Then she said, "There's something I never told you." I looked up. What? When I first chose Evelyn Grace. She paused. I thought I was taking something from you. I nodded. I know. But I was actually taking something from myself. What do you mean? I lost your trust. She looked down. And that was worth much more than a name. I didn't answer immediately. Because she was right. The name had been painful. But the broken trust had lasted much longer. I wish I'd understood that sooner, she said. So do I. After I left the hospital, I drove home thinking about everything that had happened. The stolen name. The arguments. The accusations. The apologies. The girls growing up together. The new baby. It all seemed so distant. Like something that had happened to another version of me. Then I realized why. Because I was no longer that woman. I had learned to protect my private dreams. I had learned to speak up. I had learned that forgiveness wasn't weakness. And I had learned something perhaps even more important. Not every battle deserves to be fought. Some battles are won by walking away. Some are won by staying calm. And some are won simply by refusing to become the person someone else wants you to become. A few months later, I found the original baby name list on my phone. I scrolled through it. Some names made me laugh. Some I couldn't remember adding. Some still sounded beautiful. Then I saw Evelyn Grace. I stared at it. Years ago, seeing those words would have made my chest tighten. Now, nothing. No anger. No sadness. Just a memory. I deleted the old list. Then I opened a new note. At the top, I wrote, "Things I want my daughter to know." I started typing. You don't have to compete with anyone. You don't have to prove you're better. You don't have to give up something you love just to keep someone else happy. And you don't have to become smaller so someone else can feel bigger. I paused. Then wrote one final sentence. Be kind, but never abandon yourself. I saved it. Years later, Lillian would find that note. She would probably roll her eyes at how emotional her mother was. Maybe she'd laugh. Maybe she'd understand. Maybe she wouldn't. And that was okay. Because children don't need perfect parents. They need parents who teach them how to recover from imperfect moments. How to apologize. How to forgive. How to set boundaries. How to choose themselves without hurting others. That was what I wanted for her. Not a perfect life. A strong one. One Sunday morning, I watched Lillian and Evelyn playing in the backyard. They were arguing over a toy. I smiled. Rachel came outside. They're fighting. Of course they are. Should we stop them? I shook my head. Give them a minute. We watched. Within 30 seconds, they had solved the problem themselves. They were laughing again. Rachel looked at me. How do children do that so easily? I smiled. Maybe because they haven't learned to keep score. Rachel laughed. That's true. I looked at the girls. Maybe we should learn from them. That afternoon, Rachel and I sat on the porch. The girls were playing nearby. She looked at me. Do you ever wish I'd never stolen that name? I thought about it. Then smiled. No. She looked surprised. Really? Really? Why? Because if you hadn't. I paused. I might never have learned what I know now. She smiled. So you're saying I did you a favor? I laughed. Don't push it. She laughed. Then I added. But yes. She nodded. Fair enough. That night, after everyone went home, I stood in Lillian's doorway. She was asleep. The moonlight came through the curtains. I looked at the little plaque above her bed. Lillian Rose. I remembered how carefully I'd chosen those words. How much meaning they carried. Not because they were unique. Not because nobody else had them. But because of the people they represented. The people I loved. The history I wanted to preserve. The future I wanted to build. And suddenly, I understood the entire story in one simple sentence. Rachel could steal the name I once wanted. She could never steal the life I built around mine. I smiled. Then quietly closed the door. The house was peaceful. My daughter was safe. My family was healing. And my heart was finally free. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need an apology. I didn't need Rachel to admit I had been right. I had something better. Peace. And that was worth more than any name.